everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of What to Think, VentureBeat's weekly technology podcast. I'm Dylan Tweeney, the editor of VentureBeat. I'm here with Ruth Reeder.
Hello.
In our New York office. And today we're going to be talking to Charlie O'Donnell, the founder and chief partner and sole guy at Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. He's normally in New York, but he actually is flying out to California, and will be talking with us live in the studio here. But first, some tech news highlights from VentureBeat.com. Let's look at 3 of our most popular and interesting stories from the last week. You start, Ruth.
Okay, so one thing that happened this week that was actually quite notable, it was a very big headline, but the repercussions of this news may not be as big as the headline, and that was that Yahoo took more search share than Google did in January. And so the percentage is actually quite small because, as you know, Google has like 77, almost 80% of the market, right?
Enormous, yeah.
Right, which is huge, whereas Yahoo has something like 10.9. However, it grew more percentage points in January than Google did. It's notable in that Yahoo is growing its search, which I think hasn't been the case for a while. It's stagnating for the most part.
Now, this is all down to Yahoo becoming the default search engine in the Firefox browser, is it not?
Exactly. Yeah. So Yahoo signed a deal with Mozilla. And so now it is the default where Google used to be the default browser. And so that's going to bring in, as you see, a few percentage points of share of the market. But it's still a significant partnership. And it indicates that Yahoo is still in the search game.
That partnership, which Mozilla actually had with Google for years and years and years, actually accounts or used to account for the vast majority of the money that the Mozilla Foundation or the Mozilla Corporation pulled in, because they got a ton of essentially referral fees from Google. There was a lot of criticism when they switched to Yahoo as to whether they would be able to get the same kind of revenue from Yahoo's search engine, which is, obviously has much less reach, not only on the search side, which these numbers show, but also on the advertising side in terms of how much money they're generating.
I don't know, but, I think Mozilla's taking a bet because Yahoo has shown some growth. I mean, if you look at their last earnings, their ad platforms are growing.
So certainly a good move for Yahoo.
Definitely.
Whether it pans out well for Mozilla, I don't know. And maybe this is not so surprising, but how many people actually change the default search engine in their browser? My guess is it's a very small number of people who take the trouble to do that. So if Yahoo's pre-installed and Firefox still has some market share, then I would imagine that this trend line would continue to go up. Yahoo will continue getting more search market share.
I completely agree. I think it's only good for Yahoo's search side.
All right. Let's talk about Apple and the Apple Watch. One of our reporters, Mark Sullivan, was on the train last week, and he spotted somebody in the wild with an actual Apple Watch. Now, this was not like a staged demo. This was not an Apple PR person giving him a look at how it was going to be. It was a guy who actually had the device and was out testing it or using it. Well, the thing that struck me about Mark's story is that just seeing it on somebody's wrist was enough to make Mark go, yeah, that's it. I'm a believer. I want one.
I know. That was the craziest thing about the article to me, because I feel like prior to this moment, and I don't have total confirmation on this, but I feel like Mark was not a believer up until this moment. I don't think he was sold on wearables, particularly, or within that Apple Watch. And so to see him write this was really funny. He's
totally been suckered in, I think. But it is something that Apple products do. You see them in use, or you see people with them, and they have, maybe it's just we've been trained from years of marketing and advertising to think this, but they have attractive completeness or niceness to them that makes you want them.
I mean, they definitely know what we want.
Yeah, I'm not a believer yet, but I haven't seen one actually on some real person's wrist either, so who knows, maybe I'll completely change my tune, but I can't imagine spending hundreds of dollars for that. Especially since I'm not using an iPhone at the moment, and it would be useless to me.
That's fair. Well, I could see people wanting it. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be cool if you could just get a little message on your wrist? I mean, to a certain extent, it seems implausible, but to another extent, it seems like it could make life even more efficient than it already is, which everyone loves. And if you can do it with this beautiful, leather-bound, sleek watch, then, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to throw down, a couple hundred or 500 in this case for a watch like that?
I'm going to wait for a year or two before. I don't think
until Mark gets it, till he shows up in the
yeah, and then I'll be like, must have Apple Watch. Well, all right. Let's talk about Snapchat. Ruth, like, what is the deal? Suddenly they're like a media publisher. They're like producing content of their own.
So they started the Discover channel. And when you scroll onto the screen, it's a grid of like circular icons, and it's got content from CNN, Cosmo Magazine.
Wait, so I could be watching CNN segments within Snapchat?
Yes.
Okay.
I watched National Geographic today. On Snapchat. So they have, I think, about 9 channels, including their own, I want to say. And then they have their own channel. So they're starting to produce their own content. And within that is a new micro series. I don't know that anyone else is calling it a micro series, but I am calling it a micro series.
Okay.
Because it is like 3 to 5 minute long episode of what is ostensibly a television series, except it's only mobile, it is only Snapchat, and it also only lasts for 24 hours before disappearing.
Oh, so you have to watch the episode before it disappears?
You have to. In fact, I posted a video of it that I think somebody from the Next One posted on YouTube, and I linked to that, and now it's already gone.
Wow. I had no idea. I have already missed the boat on this show. So
you cannot see it.
The show is called Literally Can't Even.
Exactly.
I can't get the tone right.
Literally can't even.
Nailed it. Yeah. So it sounds kind of dumb, honestly. It's like women and pool noodles and cute guys and
the usual stuff. But okay, so here's the thing. The show is conceived of and acted out by Emily Goldwyn and Sasha Spielberg.
Is it the famous director's
daughter, indeed. Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
So there's that. But here's the thing. So in my post, I explained what this whole thing was about, which is essentially 2 girls. One of them is going on a detox/cleanse, and so she's trying to be sober, and the other one is looking for love because she just broke up with her boyfriend. And together, these 2 girls are embarking on what will be an epic pool party with lots of booze. And
I think you've already put way more thought into this than the creators of this did.
I think I might have. But anyway, so that's the premise, right? And then all of the ridiculous stuff that you would expect to happen indeed happens. But what I think is that if Snapchat truly is trying to get into the media game, I think that like bite-sized pieces of fiction are kind of a smart move. Mm-hmm. And maybe this isn't the show, and maybe it doesn't take off. Maybe it does. Who knows? Who really cares about this show? It's sort of the idea that's brilliant and that they can really run with if they want.
If lots of people are using Snapchat, especially younger folks, young adults or teens, then it makes sense to, bring the content where they are, and they can share it around and make that part of their lives through the app they're already using. So that makes a twisted sort of logic, although I can't even imagine watching this show myself.
That's what everybody said. Everybody was pretty appalled by it. Everyone was sort of like, this is awful. I can't keep watching.
Well, it is called Literally Can't Even, so I suppose that's appropriate.
There's also train wrecks. People like watching those. So.
Absolutely. Coming up next, the Trainwreck channel on Snapchat. We're going to go talk to our guest in just a minute, but first we have a message from our sponsor. The What to Think podcast is brought to you from the San Francisco headquarters of our host, New Relic, which helps customers make sense of billions of data points about millions of applications in real time. And in addition to sponsoring this podcast and letting us use their studio space, they're a pretty cool company. More than 250,000 people leverage New Relic's comprehensive cloud-based solution to analyze more than 690 billion data points per day across more than 4 million applications. You can find out more at newrelic.com. Now let's welcome our guest, Charlie O'Donnell. He is the founder and principal partner of Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. So welcome to the show, Charlie.
Thanks for having me.
I was just looking at your bio, and one thing stands out, which is that you claim you have never been outside the 5 boroughs of New York for more than 3 weeks at a time. Is that still true?
That is still true.
Okay, so I don't think I've ever done anything with that level of consistency in my life, except maybe breathing.
It's really convenient for me because all my stuff is there.
So tell me about that. I mean, you're a New York guy, right?
I am native through and through, born in Bensonhurst, went to college at Fordham. Mm-hmm. Most people leave for college, and since I was studying finance, it seemed to make a little less sense to leave New York to study. I did try and get out once. I applied to Stanford because I thought all VCs had an MBA from Stanford, and they didn't let me in.
Okay.
So instead, I went to work for Union Square Ventures. and that worked out.
Nice alternative to going to Stanford, I think.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Cheaper.
So you're focused exclusively on New York investment opportunities. Is that
I've got to be able to bike to the company.
Cool.
That's the rule.
And you do bike?
As long as the ground isn't wet, so I haven't been biking in the New York snow.
Yeah, snow biking, it takes a particular level of dedication.
Yeah, I couldn't get the chains around the tires. Yeah.
What is it about New York these days? How's the tech ecosystem?
You know, it's interesting. When I started on the VC side in New York, so I actually used to fund funds. So no one ever really thinks about VCs having to fundraise, but we have to pitch too. And I was at the General Motors Pension Fund, which is one of the largest institutional investors in venture. So they're in Excel all the way back to like Excel 1 from 1978 or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
The guys from Union Square Ventures came in to pitch us in 2004. And I almost didn't take the meeting because the idea of a New York-based fund in 2004 seemed like a terrifically stupid idea. Because, we didn't have garages, right? So how can you start a company if you don't have a garage?
In your kitchen.
Exactly. That's when I started learning about the New York ecosystem and what was going on in my own backyard. And the timing to be in venture in early 2005 couldn't have been better. In fact, it's my 10-year anniversary for joining USV.
That's a milestone.
It was 10 years ago that I went to a firm that no one had ever heard of with two guys that became one of the best performing funds of all time.
So how have things evolved in New York in the last 10 years? Because from my perspective here, I mean, Ruth, you're Skyping us from Brooklyn, I believe, right now. So you may feel differently, but from my perspective, it seems like things have changed a lot. Your assessment, in 2004, 2005, that there wasn't much going on seems to me accurate. And now there's a lot more.
One data point that I like to look back on is the first New York tech meetup that I went to that was run by Scott Heiferman of Meetup at the time, the founder. The first meetup I went to was 25 people in the back of Scott's offices at Meetup.
And what year was this?
February of 2005.
Okay.
And now that meetup is the largest meetup, and it has close to 40,000 people. And we sell out of NYU's biggest auditorium every month.
Holy cow.
There was one or two tech events a month. There wasn't much in terms of an engineering community. That was before Google had opened up their New York office. I don't think they're there 10 years yet.
Okay.
And there wasn't much in the way of VC firms either. So it was kind of tumbleweed. I think most of the issue was that the things that were going on in the late 90s didn't really stick. You didn't have VC firms that had 10-year track records. You really only built a couple of bigger companies that lasted. It's not like the internet disappeared, but the startup community kind of did. And now we've got nearly every Valley-based fund has done a deal in New York, and all of the partners have reasons to be out there, and people have put up offices. Excel's got an office, General Catalyst has an office, and Canaan and Spark, and in addition to the funds that have grown there natively, like Union Square Ventures and RRE and First Mark, and now we've even got 2 venture capital funds in Brooklyn.
It's true that New York has really come a long way in the last 10 years, but how do you think that New York is doing in terms of attracting talent? I know that that's something that I've heard from other partners at other firms. They're worried about New York's ability to just, bring more people here, since so many of them are in San Francisco, and because it has such a bigger reputation for being startup land than we do.
New York tends to attract talent because a lot of people don't necessarily want to work in startup land. People want to work in a place that is full of lots of different types of people, and artists and actors and finance people and media people, and most of my friends are not startup people, and I think that no offense to startup people, makes my life a lot more interesting.
There is a certain level of monomania that the Silicon Valley world engenders, and if you're part of that, it's like that's all you see, right?
Which cuts both ways. You can aim to build a world-changing company here, and I think there's this goal of I want to be worth $1 billion and going public, which will attract a certain type of entrepreneur here. I think in New York, there's lots of other stuff to do. And when somebody offers you $250 million for your company, if it's financed appropriately, a lot of people take it, which is by the way, speaking from a small fund perspective, is a great outcome. But I think it's also going to prevent a lot of New York companies from maybe seeking that billion-dollar financing round and trying to go for the huge win.
The Uber or Airbnb type, or sort of stratospheric valuation and enormous amount of capital raised.
Yeah, the take over the world thing, I think, seems to happen a little less, although you don't have to aim to take over the world to do it. Look at a company like Kickstarter. They're not trying to be the tech company with the biggest valuation, but they're the bellwether of the crowdfunding space. And they give away more money than the National Endowment for the Arts every year. So they are just off doing their own thing. Or companies like MakerBot that essentially invented the 3D printing space. You know, Bree wasn't trying to take over the world. Well, he might have been actually, but he wasn't trying to do it with billion-dollar venture valuations.
Right, and that sold to Stratasys last year. Yeah, a very nice outcome for them, actually.
Well, what do you think about some of the things that the city is doing to try and bring in new talent or just sort of help grow the ecosystem in general? Do you think it's all like fluff, or do you think it can really like help gain traction?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, we had a bunch of big announcements today related to Bill de Blasio's housing policy, and the city is really, really focused right now on affordable housing. I think a lot of times people in the startup space and the entrepreneurship space overlook how things like crime and affordable housing can affect the tech community, right? So if you can't live in a place affordably, you're going to have problems attracting talent. Or you're going to raise that bar for salaries so high that people aren't going to be able to hire their people.
That's an issue here in the San Francisco Bay Area, obviously, affordable housing. But the techies are typically on the other side of that argument. They're the ones making the housing less affordable in the sort of political dynamic here. And you're saying that
it doesn't help them that the housing is less affordable. I'm sure anyone, and in fact, you know, companies like Google and Facebook have tried to build housing and gotten turned down, actually, because the existing owners want to constrain that supply.
Right.
Whereas I think in New York, we want to make it so that you don't have to raise that $1 billion to hire 10 engineers, right?
Yeah, really. Just to live here.
The thing about, I think, that has greatly affected New York is the drop in crime. New York is one of the safest big cities. And as long as we continue to be able to be a place where, you know, you can have a company like Livestream in Bushwick and feel safe walking home at night, that's a big impact. In addition to, you know, the city's coming up with some programs around entrepreneurship and stuff like that. But I tend to believe that the private sector takes care of a lot of that type of stuff when it comes to venture funding and mentoring and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's been some good programs there, but I want to see that a city government make sure that New York is livable first and foremost, right? That we don't have a garbage strike. That would be bad for the tech community. It would be bad for everybody.
That would be bad for everyone.
Yeah.
So you mentioned city government, but do you think that the startups that are succeeding, the really, you know, the big successful ones, you mentioned Livestream, but you know, the Etsy's or the Tumblrs, Shutterstock, or MakerBot for that matter, do they have a responsibility to, or a role to play in that as well?
They absolutely do, and I think encouraging participation in the local communities, I think, is really important. Making sure that you're giving back, that you're being a patron of local establishments, that you're thinking about ways to participate in local government, community boards, that sort of thing. I think that should be strongly encouraged, that these companies should have missions to be of the community, not on top of it. You know, volunteer programs is another thing. I mean, I run a nonprofit that runs a kayaking program in a park on the East River in Brooklyn Bridge Park. And we put 6,000 people on the water for free last year. And a lot of our volunteers are, because of my network, are software developers and entrepreneurs. And it's a good time.
Well, that's cool. What's the significance of, you know, really big development projects that, like, you know, this Cornell campus that's going in the next, I don't know, few years. Maybe it'll be decades, but I'm not sure.
Well, they're already starting classes, so I think Google is leasing them some space.
Right. There is some stuff going on.
Yeah. There's projects there. There's projects in the Navy Yard. Those are the types of things that only the city government can make a third of Roosevelt Island a tech campus. That's something that, you kind of need that land. And
that's an enormous project. Do you think that addresses a real need in the city?
You guys brought up the talent question. And I remember one politician had said, well, the Cornell campus will help alleviate the technical talent problem. And I said, well, actually, it'll just make it worse, because what'll happen is all these smart engineers will get trained and they'll get exposed to the entrepreneurial and startup communities, and they're going to start companies. And there's lots of money in New York. So whatever our engineer shortage is now, imagine when all these smart Cornell kids come out and want to start companies and get funded by people like me. There'll be that many more developer job openings available, and salesperson job openings and all that sort of stuff. But the aggregate amount of technical talent will go up, but there's no shortage of ideas and people willing to start things. So I don't think we're going to be, the day we sit in New York and we say, yeah, we have enough developers, that's a problem, because we run out of ideas or run out of money. So I'm happy to see lots of developer job openings, because it means that there's more good ideas being funded.
I caught you on a panel at South by Southwest a couple of years ago where you were talking about ecosystems and sort of the importance of, all the different components.
With Tony Hsieh.
Yeah, with Tony Hsieh, cool. Right, from Zappos. And I forget who else was on that panel. But it was a very interesting discussion, and it got me thinking a lot about what it takes to kind of build an ecosystem that's supportive for entrepreneurs and investors and the whole thing, which I think a lot of people have studied kind of how it works here in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, but haven't always been successful at replicating it or even creating local versions of it elsewhere, right? So do you have any insights into that?
Yeah, I think the part of the problem is that people try and create a local version of the Valley. Right. And that's impossible. What's happened here is the result of 4 generations of entrepreneurship. And, I had an opportunity to meet Don Valentine, who's the founder of Sequoia, who, as far as I know, is the only other Fordham University graduate in venture capital.
Oh, really?
And he just randomly went to my school, and I reached out to him and he agreed to meet. And he was telling me about when they had started that there were literally less than 10 people who knew as much about microchips as they did. That's a serious advantage when you're starting a venture capital firm. But right. That kind of institutional knowledge about the very core of technology is not something that Austin or Miami or Chicago is going to be able to replicate, or New York for that matter, anytime soon. I think the key is making your community something that is native to the kind of resources that you have. New York has a density and a really great public transportation network, and it has a density of clients. So the couple of attributes that make the New York system really interesting is that it's got this very vibrant angel and investor community. So clearly we're connected to money. There's a lot of companies that are in spaces that have to do with particular industries. They're maybe, fintech or fashion tech or media related. And so they leverage off of other existing industries in that space that are native to New York. But I also think the critical mass thing, the ability to have this sort of meetup and shared best practices culture. You could hop out of work at 6:30 or 7 and go to a, how to acquire customers for my startup meetup in New York. I mean, I run a newsletter that goes out to about 9,500 people in New York every week, and it's all tech events. It's a little difficult to do that in LA, where you're not about to hop in your car at 6 o'clock and go anywhere for that matter, unless the meetup is down the street.
Right.
So New York has a lot of really great attributes, whereas, I think in other places, I've said to folks who are down in Miami, like, how do you make this a destination for conferences, right? Every tech conference should be down there, because who doesn't want to go to Miami, right? Other cities, maybe they can be gateways to other types of communities. I think, whatever you've got, leverage off of that versus trying to replicate the Valley.
Do you think that as other regions gain their own communities, that the relevance or the importance of Silicon Valley is diminishing in any way?
I'm not saying that it'll diminish. It's still going to be the place where you've got the most VCs, and we're happy in New York to be the second largest venture capital community. But I think there's this growing sense that you don't need to be in the Valley to create a company. I think the keys for any kind of outside the Valley company or community is, can you answer yes to 3 questions? Can I get my company funded? Can I hire the talent that I need? And can I access customers? If you live in a place where you can answer yes to all three of those, then live in that place. People ask me if they should move to New York. I said, well, do you want to live in New York? Because if you don't want to live in New York, you're going to be miserable, basically.
Right. Especially when the weather turns the way it has been.
Yeah, exactly. I think other places will become important, and I think the world's becoming flatter and more global, and I think that that's going to be key. I think you've seen a lot of growth in the international markets, right? Like how many important companies that didn't exist 10 years ago are now coming out of Asia. And if you're aiming to be a world-changing global company, if you're not paying attention to Asia right now, then you're really missing out, or maybe you've already missed out on that boat. And it's U.S. companies have had a really tough time breaking in there.
Yeah, it sort of moves one direction. Asian companies are having an easier time getting their product here, as opposed to the other way.
Yeah, and I think it's not just about is the Valley as important, but is the U.S. as important in general? And I think a lot of companies here have to ask themselves that question. Is this the only market that we should be going after versus it being Brooklyn versus the Valley or anything like that?
Right.
That said, I'd be curious to know where you think New York is going in the next 10 years tech-wise, or anything that you've got your eye to.
I think New York is going to continue to be a really interesting place to build a company. One of the reasons there is we've got sort of a critical mass of the Etsy's and Kickstarters and Shutterstocks that are going to throw off a lot of talent the way that PayPal threw off a lot of talent and entrepreneurs here. People who were there for the growth of these companies. I've already told Matt Stinchcomb at Etsy, who's the founder who's still there, I said, Matt, I want to back you for your next thing. He doesn't have a thing yet. He's still working there, but just let me know, because at some point Etsy will be a public company and that'll continue to grow. I think the key is that middle layer of talent as companies grow. So I've got a couple of companies now in my portfolio. I led the seed round at a company called Canary. They're up to 70 odd people, and they need people who have managed engineering teams because their engineering team is up over 40 people now. I think the Valley's got a lot of that, and it's just as important to get that level of skilled talent to enable companies to grow in New York as it is getting more entrepreneurs or more VCs. There's nothing stopping a lot of people in New York from starting companies, but scaling companies in New York and making sure that New York is the kind of place where experienced talent helps that grow, I think is really key. So the next time the New York City government thinks about pulling in engineers or pulling in talent, I wonder if maybe we should think about a management tour. So let's go city to city and see, who's got experience running teams that we can convince to move to New York.
Increasing the depth of the talent, not just
the bench depth is really key.
Yeah. Well, we are almost out of time, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Really nice to see you out here, and hope you have a safe and uneventful flight back into the winter.
So too.
Yes, and hopefully I can catch up with you sometime when you're in New York.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you, listeners, for joining us for What to Think, VentureBeat's technology news podcast. As always, you can find us online at VentureBeat.com, and you can find us on iTunes or Stitcher. Just search for What to Think. And we'll catch you later.